What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by CHTV contributor Mark Oldacres. Mark, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Summer is summering, which in the UK is not always a given. So that's nice. It's
That's
been
true.
nice,
That's very
but
true. Well,
you
my
know,
summer has consisted of watching Chelsea hoist a trophy, as
well, if you
you
want
may
to
have
call it a
seen.
trophy, that's fine. If you want a victory lap on that, that's I'll keep my thoughts to myself on that one.
Like I said yesterday, everyone who says that the Club World Cup doesn't matter are fans of clubs that didn't win the Club World Cup.
This is
That's
true.
how that boils down.
This is true.
But we are going to talk about a different football today. Obviously, the Green Bay Packers are set to start arriving for training camp, the rookies anyway, at the end of this week on Friday. We're recording this on Monday. And then full camp begins the 23rd. We're less than 2 weeks away. I cannot wait to get to Green Bay, Wisconsin, watch these practices and watch these guys rise and fall up and down the depth chart. And you've written a piece at CHTV that I did want to highlight because I thought you did a really good job of capturing some of the bubble guys, some of the guys that are going to be fighting for jobs, not only on the 53, but even on the practice squad, like guys who could go from, hey, maybe they're even in the lineup in week one to maybe they're even on the street by the time we kick off there in a couple months. But really just want to kind of go down the list here, starting with Emmanuel Wilson, who I'm kind of glad you started with him because he is a guy, when you go back and you watch his tape from 2024, you see a really talented player, right? A guy who does pretty much everything that's asked of him at a pretty damn high level. He certainly isn't explosive. He certainly isn't a guy who's going to run away from people, a lot of wow plays. But you talk about a down in and down out really good football player. I think Wilson has that going for him, at least heading into this training camp.
Yeah, 100%. And I think Wilson is one of those guys where it kind of feels like harsh putting him on a list like this, even because of how well he's performed when he's been given
Right.
opportunities. I mean, you look at just like PFF's grades, he was like the 12th best running back in the league, according to them last year, of the guys that kind of had enough snaps to qualify. Obviously, he didn't get that many snaps, so it is still a relatively small sample size. But we saw it, especially in those games where they went super run heavy in the Malik Willis games and stuff like that. When he came in to spell Josh Jacobs, the offense didn't really skip a beat. He's a
Right.
really efficient runner. Unfortunately, and I think this is kind of going to be a theme of a lot of the guys on this list, is the Packers roster, as it was last year going into camp, is just very deep across various positions. And they're going to have decisions to make at running back. Are they going to keep 3 or 4? And that's going to go a long way to deciding whether Wilson's job is under jeopardy or not, really. I think if they keep 4, he's obviously going to make it. But if they decide they're only going to keep 3 because they need the spot somewhere else, I think the thing with him is, can he be trusted to be that kind of third down back that's going to keep Jordan Love upright? And that is obviously a crucial job. It's not the sexiest job when you think about a running back, but we've seen things like this before with like Tyler Goodson, who looked like a real talented running back, but he wasn't big enough and they couldn't trust him on third down. And that's going to be a big thing for Wilson this summer. He has to kind of really show that he can be that trustworthy guy if they need him.
Well, and the thing, too, when you look at his competition, whether it's Marshawn Lloyd, who obviously we saw very little of last year, or Chris Brooks, who, to your point, he was that guy on third down, right? When they absolutely needed to make sure that they were sound in pass pro, Brooks was usually the guy getting the call. And to me, I think a big part of this training camp is going to be on that exact tip. And it's not like Lloyd's going to be handed a gig where he's going to like be the number one guy off the bench automatically if he proves that he's not up to that, being that guy on third down who you can count on in pass pro. But Brooks has at least put it on tape. Like that to me is where, if that's the deciding factor, because I don't think there's much else that Brooks can't do. I don't think he's been given a ton of opportunity to do it. But if that's the decider, I think that's where it could become tough for Wilson, because to your point, there's just not a ton of tape out there, because when he was on the field, he wasn't often cast in that role. It was either they were getting him the ball, handing it off, or giving it to him in space in the passing game. It's not like he had a ton of reps in regards to like being set back there as a pass protector.
Right. And I think that's the thing ultimately, if they do just keep 3, Lloyd's obviously going to make the team. And the funny thing about it is that whoever makes the team, if they only keep 3, whichever one makes the team with Lloyd might get the call to get on the field ahead of Lloyd still. Like that could still happen. But then the other one is probably not going to make the team at all. So it's a very interesting situation. And I think it's just the decision they're going to have to make is what you just talked about, is that Brooks has the more solid resume in terms of that you can trust him, but Wilson is the more dynamic runner. And they're just going to have to decide if they only keep 3, what's more important to them.
And some of that is about the puzzle that Brian always talks about, right? Especially at the bottom of the roster, when you're deciding who to keep, who to cut, and hopefully get on the practice squad, etc. Some of that may come down to where can we go heavy, where can we go light, things of that nature. And speaking of numbers and guys getting caught up in a numbers game, another guy you have listed here is Bo Melton, which I think most folks after the draft were already talking about, oh, this doesn't set up well for him. I'm not counting him out by any stretch of the imagination, but it certainly didn't look good coming out of the draft. And then you get to the offseason workouts, you get to OTAs and minicamp, and McCall Hardman putting on a show almost every day. It's like, obviously there's a long way to go, and these guys got to get pads on, and we'll see what happens when the rubber meets the road in that regard. But I think Bo Melton has a uphill climb, even with all the extracurricular stuff he's been given to do.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough for him. I think, in my writing about this, I was really only thinking about him as a receiver from that perspective. Obviously, he does have the corner. We're yet to see how real that's actually going to be when training camp starts. But that is something that can obviously help him out if he, really takes to it. But yeah, just as a receiver, he's just going to have his work cut out for him. And it's tough. It's tough on him. And it's just kind of the nature of the NFL. Like, he's not really done anything wrong. I think you look back kind of back end of 2023 into then decent parts of 2024, he was a big part of the offense. He was out there, a fair bit. And the way he played at the end of 2023, he really earned that. He made some big plays, even in the playoffs. He scored a touchdown in the divisional round loss. But unfortunately, like you say, it's a numbers game. They've added 2 guys in the draft this year, and his skill set of the kind of bubble guys in the receiver room might be the most replaceable now. You think with someone like Golden coming in, obviously he's the first round pick, and his body type and athletic profile is very similar to Melton, but obviously has just a lot more pedigree. So Melton might be the one that they feel kind of best about letting go. The interesting thing with Melton is, and we dealt with this last season. Last year was the first time probably in the history, well, not in history, since Taysom Hill. Last year was the first time that guys were really getting claimed.
Yes. And they had 3 last year, 3 or 4? I think they had 3 total.
The most in the league. Yeah. And if Bo Melton gets released by the Packers, they're not getting him back on the practice squad. I feel pretty certain in saying that. I think he could be, a receiver 4, maybe even a low end receiver 3 for some teams. He's put that on tape. He was that for the Packers for a playoff team at times last season. So I feel like he wouldn't be rushing to get back on the practice squad and rejoin this massive depth chart at receiver.
Right. Next up, you have a guy where I really didn't think much as far as, like, I thought he's pretty solid, but putting him on this list means that you have utmost confidence in my guy, Ketan Oladapo. You have Zane Anderson at safety, who, again, I thought, before I read your piece, I was like, if you had asked me about Zane Anderson, I would have said, a guy who stepped in really admirably last year from scrimmage in a way I don't think many people were expecting. And he is a special teams demon, which is your path to the roster as a kind of bottom roster guy. But I see the light here. I see you're talking about, the log jam at safety, the number of draft picks they have there. And yeah, I think it will most likely come down to Zane Anderson or Oladapo.
Yeah, well, I think personally, I think Oladapo is probably going to make the team. He didn't get to play too much last year. Obviously, had the injury in camp, and that kind of set him back a lot. He wasn't really needed to be thrown in for a lot of the season because the safeties were playing pretty well. But when he did play, I thought he showed, why me, a lot of other people liked him much more than a 5th round pick. So my optimistic view on him is that I'm fairly sure he is going to make the team. Brian doesn't like to give up on his draft picks too easily, and he's given them no reason to give up on it. And Zane, it's just whether, again, it's just all going to be numbers. Like, do they feel like they need to keep a 5th safety? Right. Maybe they do, because if Bullard's going to kind of split time again and be playing corner sometimes, do they feel like they only have 3.5 safeties if they only keep 4? So I think this is not a kind of a he's in trouble by any means. But again, I think it could just come down to we just feel like we need to keep this player over him or he's going to get claimed and stuff like that. But like you say, it would be a shame because he's been such a key presence for them on special teams, and defensively he's not ashamed himself by any means. He's been solid when he's had to play.
Then you have Brenton Cox Jr., and a little bit later you have Aaron Mosby. I'm going to put them kind of together here because I am hopeful that these guys are in this conversation, if only because that would mean the Packers are playing well at outside, defensive end in this 4-3 scheme. I'm not convinced that that's going to materialize, more so than somebody's got to be the odd man out in the numbers game. And I think if you look at both Brenton Cox and Mosby last year, they had their flashes, they had their moments, but nothing on a consistent basis that would have you say, like, oh, these guys are like lock solid, absolutely part of your core team. I'm with you. I think, obviously they've made some additions both along the expected kind of growth of their roster, but also in the draft, a couple of guys at their position. Yeah, I don't know if it's as easy as a 1-for-1 swap in either of these cases. And then I haven't even mentioned, I think you did in your piece, Kingsley Enagbare. There's another guy who, again, there are moments, but nothing even approaching consistency. To me, that's what this summer is all about. Who does this down in, down out, day in, day out, throughout camp, throughout the preseason? Because up till this point, no one has.
Yeah, I think, they always talk about competition and wanting to have competition. I think the edge room is kind of going to be, other than the top two, Gary and Van Ness are locked in, it seems. It's really going to be, I don't think there's any loyalties. I don't think there's going to be a guy who's going to make it because of what he's done in the past. Even Enagbare, who obviously has played a lot of football for the Packers, it's truly just going to be what happens in camp. I truly believe that. Obviously, the two rookies are going to make the team. Sorrell is another guy who a lot of people obviously thought he shouldn't have lasted till the fourth round with kind of the profile he has. And Colin Oliver is just so different from every other rusher that they have that they're going to want to keep him on the team regardless. And again, fifth round picks as rookies aren't usually getting cut. So I truly think it's kind of, again, how many do they want to keep after those four? But then it's literally going to be Enagbare, Cox, Mosby, whoever the kind of back end guys behind them are, who shows up and who performs, And I think Enagbare, with him, he's kind of played himself into this position in a negative sense because he was a very solid rotational guy. And I think the upside was kind of like you saw something there. But last season, when he actually became the starter after they traded Preston Smith, he really tailed off once he got that opportunity.
Once he was out there on a consistent basis, his performance was not consistent. I very much agree.
And that's not unusual. That can be sometimes when guys are put in more prominent roles, they're put in an every down role, they're not ready for it, or they're exposed a bit more because they're not being thrown into situations that are beneficial for them, as regularly. So he's kind of come back to the pack. And Cox, in the opportunities he got, we heard how much, Jeff Hafley was pumping him up towards the back end of last season. And he put up some like decent numbers in terms of pressures and had a couple sacks. So he could have even moved ahead of Enagbare by now. Enigbare's only got 1 year left on his deal as well. That's another factor in there. So if they kind of feel like they know what he is and they want to search for a bit more upside there, especially with how they struggled to rush the passer with 4 last year, they kind of have to shoot for the upside. So it's really going to be interesting. And there's a job to be won definitely for multiple guys in camp.
Totally agree. And I do think if that were to transpire, if these guys are like just noticeably better, more consistent, etc., I wouldn't be surprised if they try to flip Enagbare, like try and get a draft pick for him. Just because, that's no fault of his. It's just like that's the idea of roster building, right? You're continuously adding talent, hoping to improve and develop, etc. The roster might pass Enagbare by this summer. We'll see. Ways to go there. I want to wrap up back at the wide receiver group because you've also mentioned Mecole Hardman and Malik Heath. I think that's obvious, right, as far as their inclusion in that logjam at wide receiver. The Hardman thing for me is so interesting because there's one component when you talk about Mecole Hardman that does, to me, make him, you have to include him in this conversation simply because of the contract he signed, right? The idea that he is eminently cuttable. Now, that doesn't take away the fact that he looked really good this spring, but also he's the one guy on this roster who has NFL punt return experience slash ability who has done it consistently throughout his career. To me, that doesn't make him safe, but man, that is a big chip in his favor.
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to overreact too much to just kind of OTA stuff, but it did feel weird even putting him on this list based on kind of how he performed in those couple practices. And like you say, there's kind of like such two ends of the spectrum with how you could view his status in terms of like likelihood to make the team. Because on the one hand, like you say, not only the price of the contract, but when he signed it before the draft, and then they drafted 2 receivers in the first 3 rounds, which they clearly weren't planning on doing. So that obviously makes it more difficult for him. But then again, the experience, not only the experience of punt and kick returns, like you say, which I think is obviously going to be probably the key to him making the team for sure. Right. If he locks down that job, he's going to make the team. But he's just an experienced NFL receiver. And
that's the other part, yeah.
As much as, we still like the guys that are there in that room, we saw kind of the ups and downs that they've been through. And, his career hasn't exactly been shiny from scrimmage. That's obviously why he was available when he was. But there is experience there. And you look back at kind of like the production and the kind of things he's put out there on tape. He has legit production out there. Like, this is a real NFL receiver with some bona fides. He's played on a Super Bowl champion team. So it's kind of you can look at it either way. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he's super safe, or if he just somehow ends up not making it at all because, again, they like the upside of maybe one of the other receivers.
And then you look at Heath. To me, it's interesting because he's such a physical presence on the perimeter, which is where I think he makes kind of his case as far as being able to not only stick around, but at least on the practice squad. Because, for all the talk of, Jaden Reed, now we've got Matthew Golden, we've got these guys who are a little bit, lesser in stature, let's say. Not to say that they're not physical or whatever, but Malik Heath, when they go 2 wide receivers, they like him out there on the perimeter, especially in the run game, which sounds weird to talk about with a wide receiver, but it is the difference between being able to bust something up a sideline because you've absolutely kicked the corner out of the club. And that's what Heath has done on a consistent basis. I know his opportunities haven't been there in the passing game, nowhere near as much as he'd probably like. But I tell you what, every time he's out there, you just throw on the tape, you have a guy who is beating the hell out of opposing defensive backs. And I got to think LaFleur and company absolutely love that.
Yeah, he's a guy who I think if they end up cutting him, I think it will hurt, the coaching staff. I think he seems like a favorite. I think the unfortunate thing for him is that he's very much kind of stylistically, he's kind of in that like Alan Lazard kind of like mold.
Yeah. And he's a goon, definitely.
Exactly. Right. And where Lazard got those opportunities to start truly, because obviously the situation they were in receiver-wise was different to what it is now, but because Rodgers really stumped for him to get him in the lineup. Right. He got those opportunities, in his kind of second season. And by the end of that, it was clear he was a legit part of the offense. Whereas Heath has never really had those chances. And he hasn't obviously lit it up, the stat sheet when he has had chances. So I'm not by any means saying that, they've done it wrong or anything like that. But it's a tough one. The interesting thing, like you say about the blocking, is like, what direction is the offense going to go this year? Because you have drafted Matthew Golden. Like, he is not. And I've watched the tape. He tries as a blocker. It's not something that overly concerns me, but it's not the kind of, the kind of alpha that they've prioritized in that sense. And if you're going to have Golden eventually, hopefully on the field, you're going to have Jaden Reed on the field. That's kind of 2 guys out there probably most of the time who are not going to block that well. You've obviously got Watson when he comes back. Wicks is a really good blocker, but do they feel they need to keep Heath because he has that and they don't want to lose?
I mean, that's the thing. They can set it and forget it when he's out there because they don't have to worry about it. Now, the thing with Golden too is like, look, he's a rookie, right? Yes, he's going to have to learn. Like, that is the whole point of a coaching staff, to develop that skill. And I think he, like you said, he's certainly a willing blocker, so I'm not worried about that. But especially early in the year, I think Heath is a dog that you want out there, like hurting guys, like putting guys in the dirt so that Jacobs can turn what should have been a 3 or 4 yard gain into a 7 or 12 yard gain, And I'm not saying that's like the only thing, but it is certainly, again, when you're talking end of camp, they're having those conversations with the personnel group. That's something that's going to be talked about without question. In regards to your other point, Watson has been phenomenal in that part of the game, but he's gone until probably mid-season at least, right? So I'm thinking if I'm the coaching staff, I need at least one guy out there who is my enforcer. And Heath has been that guy. That's been proven.
Right, 100%. And I think that's, again, we can, we're getting ahead here, but even thinking like week one, you're playing the Detroit Lions. Like
Yes.
that is it's already a statement game, like week one off the rip, based on kind of how they've been punked by the Lions,
I was just going to say, a team that's been pretty damn physical with you the last couple of years. Yeah.
And considering how the Packers seem to want to kind of push their identity towards, we want to be physical, we want to control the game, we want to run the ball. Mm-hmm. Are you going to throw Matthew Golden out there week one, opposite kind of the big physical guys
squad
on that
Detroit has, right?
I mean, it'll be a real feather in his cap if he does, prove to that level that he can get out there. But like you say, there's a role for a Wicks or a Heath in the lineup every snap because of how they want to run the ball, especially against these big physical teams in the NFC North.
Couldn't agree more. Mark, really appreciate the time. If you haven't read it, please check out Mark's piece on CHTV.com. There's a link in the description of this video to do so. Mark, thanks so much. Have a good rest of your summer, and we'll see you undoubtedly when training camp starts.
Yeah, almost there. Thanks. Always good to talk to you.